big picture things, like get the idea of what it is you're offering. So you're going to be doing 2 workshops on agroforestry and forest gardening. So
Yes.
can you start off, give with some definitions, like what is forest gardening, what's agroforestry?
Well, I think forest gardening is really not so different from edible landscaping, depending on the degree to which you want to take it. I think gardening is ultimately an artistic pursuit, and your efforts in it, your utilization of the land even, follows your love of the plants and your knowledge of the plants. So, to some degree, forest gardening ought to be a joy. If you love gardening, raising flowers, herbs, and vegetables, the forest can grow around your garden, your conventional garden of annual production. Alongside potatoes, tomatoes, and greens, you can be growing berry shrubs, cane fruits, and larger trees. So as you go further to the edges of your property, you can grow larger trees that you might harvest on say in the fall. Whereas your garden, you're going to be very active in the spring planting, summer maintenance, and fall. And your berry shrubs are going to come in at a nice, very nice time of year while you're planting your summer garden. So when you choose to attend forest gardening, you're going to learn a lot about speciation, also selection, and timing. And I think you're going to learn a lot because I have a lot of experience from a commercial farming standpoint as well as from the artistic hobby standpoint. Because I consider my home, I'm managing 2.4 acres, to be an art project above anything else.
Great. So what is a project you're working on that you're most excited about right now regarding forest gardening, agroforestry, on your own property or with someone else?
That's a hard question to answer. I really enjoy the social element. I'm glad to be teaching at the Organic Grower School again. This will be the first time in the fall. I like to meet new people and talk up tree crops. I'm happy to always to purchase a lot of bare root, edible, you can say useful trees, mostly well adapted, natives like mulberry, persimmon, pawpaw. And I plant them around my own property and neighbors' properties, but also to just give them away, start a conversation, in addition to the chestnuts that I raise. I've gotten more into, you can say, annual gardening. I'm interested next year, after raising a pretty nice garden, despite having 3 kids, 3 daughters. We raised a pretty nice garden this year, but next year I want to really hone it in terms of the timing and the selection. So that's going to favor root crops, radishes, beets, carrots, and white potatoes, and then Indian corns. We want to raise a long season and a short season.
Cool. So can you give an example of an exciting, just general local application that you've seen or worked on in Western North Carolina? An application of a forest gardening project.
Well, when I Googled forest gardening, because when I create a presentation that I hope you're going to come and see, I try to start from the most basic, because when you've been doing this for a lot of years, you often don't ask the right questions, and because of that, you're not able to answer simple questions. So I typed in forest gardens, or famous forest gardens, and of course 2 came up, and they're included in the presentation. One of them is the Asheville City. It's right there off of Hazard near Stephensley, and it serves a low-income neighborhood. Yeah, and it brings out an eclectic bunch of people to pick pawpaws and different things in season.
Cool. And do you know of any exciting global applications of agroforestry, something?
Yes, okay, so now we're talking about more of the agroforestry approach. So I've worked on 3 larger scale projects. And one in Tennessee. We planted 1,200 trees in just a span of hours after doing the initial site work. We had the benefit of an 80 horsepower tractor, so it was very much fun to work with the land managers, and I trained the land managers in how to maintain it after cutting the soil, mechanically drilling holes, installing the trees, mulching the trees and the tree tubes. So I have the photos to document it, but I'm also very interested in agroforestry pursuits worldwide. Most of them are in the tropics, of course. So there are some good resources for temperate region precedents, agroforestry. You're going to learn about those if you come to my module. Another state I did one in was upstate New York, and then I'm working with the 20 acres of permanent cow pasture here. We favor species that are grazable. So black locust, Russian mulberry, that's Morus alba tartarica, in addition to native mulberry. And we're also putting in some larger trees, but we're favoring open canopy trees, really the best ones for I think fruits, mulberries and persimmons in this region, hands down. Because mulberries bear for a long part of June and July, up to 6 to 8 weeks, and the animals eat them. Persimmons are from the fall. If there's not a stiff wind, sometimes they'll stay on the tree until December. And they'll start in September. So those are good carbohydrates available to grazing animals, whatever livestock you choose to carry. There's also, the leaves are edible, the aforementioned black locust. Sure. Yeah, the reason I love agroforestry so much, and I really like to study what's happening in the tropical countries, because when you have a society that's so dependent on the land, and its yearly production, the smallest little change to the system, the most minor improvement, you can say, has sweeping implications and is adopted very rapidly. For instance, in Niger, there's a very interesting article written by the World Agroforestry Center in which they adopted this nitrogen-fixing tree, and they planted it all through their fields, and their fields are basically the Sahel region. It's all nearly just bone-dry sand. This tree fixes nitrogen, but it loses its leaves during the rainy season. So it has this funny scenario where the crop gets full light just when it needs it. So they plant the corn at the end of the dry season, which you would expect. And this, I think it's called the boa tree, loses its leaves at that time.
Cool. So one thing I was wondering is, a lot of farmers, market farmers, are super busy with their annuals. So why and how could local farmers integrate more perennial crops?
Field edges, roadsides, with a little bit of extra maintenance each year, and obviously the initial stages and efforts of planting. In return, many years later, you do have crops. And some of these, for instance, chestnut, which is growing in popularity nationwide, retails at $6 a pound. If you live in New York City, you'll see them as much as $15 a pound. So that one's no-brainer, for instance. Also, if you're doing non-perishables, if you already have it set up, you can, if you have a kitchen set up or somebody working with you or under you, you can do processing with jams and jellies. I think there's no limit to the market for those. I myself I'm interested in the more irregular things like the Cornelian cherry dogwood and the Nanking bush cherry, both of which are kind of sour fruits. So, the birds don't get them. And also, there's people are interested in sour tastes now. The sour beer thing, for instance. I like spicy chutneys, so that's what I plan to experiment.
Great.
That answers your question?
Yeah, perfect. And then, so what about, say, just the backyard gardener, homesteader? How could they apply forest gardening or agroforestry methods, say, if they have just a little patch to play with?
Yes, for backyard enthusiasts and gardeners, it's a pretty short leap to think about, well, let's say, I'll start over here. For gardeners, what do you seek in the middle of the day when it's hot, when you're weeding in hot weather? You seek a little bit of shade. So I think every garden benefits from the action of a microclimate. If you study your land and the interactions of light through it, you can plant a nice windbreak, for instance, on the side of your garden that collects the strongest wind. Now, wind, of course, shifts. In the summer, it kind of, in the mountains at least, it can come from almost any direction, but it largely comes from the west or the north. So the action of a short row of trees there, maybe could be berry bushes, it could be a cascade, you could have hazelnuts for something larger. Even behind that, something higher, big trees, apples and pears, hazelnuts. Then you could do a row of blueberries and then cane fruits. Manage them nicely if you have the land for it, and then have your annual garden. And then on the other side of it, you could plant another windbreak. Smaller, I'd recommend, for the east side. And then you have a place to go when it's hot. You can sip your iced tea.
Yeah, multiple purposes. And so finally, what will participants get if they come to your workshops? What information will they get? What will they do? Why should someone come to the workshops?
You're going to like my class, no matter what. I can guarantee it. Because I've worked on my presentations for a long time. I've actually had them prepared for quite a few years, but I made them broader for these workshops. You can expect to come for a presentation. There's my 7-year-old. Sorry, that's my 7-month-old. Goo goo gaga in the window. The presentation is going to be 100 slides. So at 3 minutes a slide, that will put us right up to lunch. Does that make sense? There's a lot of eye candy in there, a lot of practical information. You can give me questions anytime, derail me. I have a lot of experience, and you can say stories to tell. And you can say a colloquial sense of humor that I'm happy to share with you. And after lunch, instead of falling asleep, we're going to do some self-design. So I'm going to give you some prompts, and I want you to bring some maps and a couple of pictures of your properties if you can, as well as a laptop. And we're going to do some research. That's mostly self-guided, but I'm going to come around and help you. And then after that, it's not going to be long, we're going to go strike out to the field. So whether you choose to come to the forest gardening class or the agroforestry class or both, we're going to learn each day distinct different methodologies in the field. For the agroforestry class, we're going to lay out a field. We're going to do a mock layout, which means we're going to use, you see that over there, that roll measure? We're going to use a roll measure to take field measurements. We can use spray paint and flags. And I think for that module, we're also going to do compost tea prep. And then in the forest gardening class, we're going to do a pruning and grafting demonstration. And we're going to tour a forest garden or two at Warren Wilson. So we're going to get some eyes-on fun as well.